Hi, this is Tay with Thinking with Tay. And today we have a special guest today. Her name is Amanda Witherspoon. Amanda hails from Hickory, North Carolina, which is my hometown, a hometown girl who I have known for a number of years. She's done some fantastic things in our community, state, and federally. So today we're going to speak to her today about individual education plans and the program that supports it. So I feel like this is a critical conversation to have simply because in our communities, in schools, community schools, the state, the federal level, we have to ensure that our children, all children, receive the educational needs specific to their individual needs. And so today, Amanda is skilled in this very area to speak to special education, etc. And again, we will introduce her to some and we'll reintroduce her to others. So we're going to get started, Amanda. Just to share a little bit more about Amanda. Amanda, again, originally from North Carolina, holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Sociology from Lenoir-Rhyne College, graduate certificate in teaching students with learning disabilities from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and Master's of Arts in Education Executive Leadership from Gardner-Webb University. Throughout her career, Amanda has delved into various areas, including mental health, the judicial system, and family services. She embarked on her professional journey as a teaching assistant for students with behavioral challenges. Subsequently, she served as a special education teacher and then as a special education director at the district level. Amanda's expertise extends to the state level, having held diverse positions within the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. Her extensive background includes providing support to families residing in public housing, as well as those with incarcerated youth, assisting them in addressing their physical and emotional needs. This knowledge is complemented by a comprehensive understanding of challenges faced by these communities. Currently, Amanda serves as a program associate within the Special Education Practice and Policy Team at a research development and service agency. In this capacity, she contributes to cross-content area projects and works as a technical assistance provider for a federally funded technical assistance center. Hear ye, Amanda Witherspoon. Amanda, thank you so much for being here with Thinking with Tay today and myself.
Thank you for having me, Tay. It's good to see you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Amanda, we're just going to jump right on into this again, just to set the foundation for our listeners here today. Again, just to reiterate, we are discussing today understanding IEPs, individual education plans, things you should know. Now, Amanda, tell me, we understand that with respect to special education, there's a law that supports this. That's the IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This act ensures students with a disability are provided with a free, appropriate public education that is tailored to their individual needs. Now, coming from my background, of course, I'm a lawyer. I was in criminal law. I understand that the very need to address this particular topic, because sometimes, even in the criminal justice system, not just in the schools, there are situations where officers, the school, judicial system don't really understand special needs, and that there are laws that support a child's needs in terms of how they need to be met in the community, in the school. And sometimes there we find that these kids are sentenced, and these particular laws and issues and disabilities may not even be considered in this aspect, which is very alarming and very concerning to me. So today, I just want to speak with you for us to better understand the laws that protect us, our children. So hopefully, again, we can delve into this conversation so that we can learn a little bit more about this process and enlist your multiple years of experience in this area.
Sounds good.
Okay. So what would you consider, or in your words, what is an individual education program?
I think I would kind of go back to what you said. It is a plan that supports that individual student based on their needs, looks as
Okay.
well as their strengths. So we want to make sure that we have those strengths and we can build on those to address any of their deficits. It provides the accommodations and modifications for what that student needs, whatever setting it may be. It may be in the general classroom, or it may be in a pull-out situation or a self-contained classroom. So it just depends on what the child's needs are. And those
Okay.
IEP plans are tailored based on that. It guides the teachers on what their actions are and how they're supposed to support the student. It gives them the present levels of academic and functional performance. And that gives that's the starting point as far as instruction, providing instruction, especially design instruction for students with disabilities.
Awesome. Awesome. Very good information. So tell me, what is the process for determining if a child qualifies for an IEP in the school?
Okay, so it is a referral process, and
Okay.
anyone can refer a student. It can be the parent, it can be the teacher, anyone that's connected to the student that has information about the educational needs of the student. That's how it starts. Most of the students, they call it different things depending on the district, but their student support teams, just different things, but it actually will go to a team to kind of start their referral process and start looking at the student and trying to figure out what the next steps are. So they'll do that. They'll connect with a parent, regardless of whether it was a teacher who initiated, they will connect with a parent. So they're part of that, they're part of the process as it starts out. Then they should be explaining everything to them and how that timeline and everything works.
Okay, that's great information. So just a quick follow-up with respect to that. So is there a different process in terms of, like, say, for instance, because I understand even with the academically and intellectually gifted program, sometimes parents want to try to identify or have their kids receive additional support with respect to maybe advancement in education. And sometimes that process for parents is a little harder than it is for the administration or the principal or a teacher. So I wanted to understand if, in fact, there was a differentiation in process. Does the parent have to get like a psychological exam? Is there any support that needs to be presented outside of that? Because it looks like it's an easier process with respect to an administrative referral or a teacher referral or principal referral over a parent referral.
No, there's no difference. The only thing I would distinguish is because the qualification and the referral process for a student with that may be a student with a disability is different than academically intellectually gifted. Those are two separate programs, and their qualifications are different. So those are two different conversations or whatever. But either way, there's the parent. No one trumps it. It depends on as soon as the school, because whether it's the teacher, once again, but if it's a parent, the parent would make that suggestion to the school and say, I think my child is struggling. I would like to see if, what supports is available or whatever it is. And they would kind of write it out, and they could connect. Their first point of contact most of the time is that child's teacher.
Yes.
But it could be that they've been seeing, the teacher seeing some things as well. But at whatever moment a referral comes in, whether it's a parent, teacher, whomever, that referral process starts. So it shouldn't. And if it does, and if it seems like there is a barrier, I would connect with, if she's taught with the parents have taught with the teacher, and they don't see things moving along, just connect with the administrator at that school level. That would be another thing. But yes, there's no priority over it. Whoever, as soon as they get it, they're required to go ahead and start the referral process.
By law. Got it. Okay. And then can you share a little bit about the timeline? I understand with respect to, I believe it's North Carolina. Now you can correct me if I'm wrong. There's a 90-day timeline for the referral, and it starts at the referral process whenever, I guess, a parent, a teacher, a principal, or whatever considers that child. Is there, with respect to the 90-day timeline, can you, tell me about that process and what if it expires?
Okay, so I can tell you about the timeline, but it would depend on the specific state. States sometimes have their timelines, but it does align with the federal requirements, and it can't do any less. So that's something to be mindful of. And also another thing to be mindful of as well. So the referral process starts right away. That's the information seeking time to find out what is actually going on with the student and kind of where they need to start. Now, the referral process and the evaluation process are somewhat different, not necessarily, but the referral is not necessarily saying that they're starting any testing or any evaluations. What they're doing initially is having a conversation, getting the parents in and talking to the teachers and kind of getting that big picture of the student. And then they'll start working on some support, seeing what other things they need to do. And they'll do interventions based on what the needs are. If it's something in reading, if it's like there's issues in reading, behaviors or whatever, they start the information process. And then they're starting to kind of set things in place to say, okay, let's try these. And they may be different. They may run the interventions at different times. It depends. A lot of times people ask, well, how long do you need to run interventions before they start testing? Well, it just depends. It depends on how the child is responding to the instruction or the interventions, or if you feel like you may need to maybe make some changes or adjustments. But once that decision is made from that referral piece, that is when parents come together and everyone signs off the team. They'll sign off and they'll say, okay, it looks like we want to refer the child for an evaluation. Then that starts the time. Okay.
Excellent. Excellent.
So that's something to be specific about when you're working with the schools and parents. You know, if you're talking to teachers, and make sure that is communicated to you to say, okay, what is this right now that we're doing, and making sure that you understand when that evaluation process starts, because they're going to there'll be a decision to say, okay, well, you know, the interventions are working. Sometimes the interventions work. And they may not need to do any evaluation beyond that, but it depends. But it's the team decision based on the information and the needs of the student, because the student's needs drive that timeline as far as everything. So yeah, once they do that, once they sign up and say, well, yes, we're gonna evaluate the child, they will. The school will go ahead and set up evaluations. They'll have a psychologist that will come in to do the psychoeducational. I think you mentioned that earlier. So they would do the testing based on those needs. They would do that psychoeducational, and that would include the more like they have the different Woodcock-Johnson's, the different academic tests that they do. That would yield scores. They'll also look at other pieces. So if a child, it seems like they may be with any intellectual deficits or whatever, they may add some other assessments, adaptive assessments, evaluations, or behaviors. So it just depends. But once again, because they've been working with the parents and this child and doing the interventions, they know those areas of need. Specifically. So they would actually choose those actual assessments and evaluations to provide to use to evaluate the child. And that
excellent. Oh my goodness, phenomenal information, very detailed, very poignant information. And this is certainly helpful to our listeners, because many of our listeners, a lot of times they're just not educated about the process. That's why I think that this is a critical conversation to have. A lot of times, parents are, they receive documentation saying, hey, I think your child may need special needs assistance, within education. Sometimes that's identified through maybe failing grades, that maybe that's identified through, I know there's different qualifiers, but, it may be the grades, it may be them acting out in class, acting, in a way that may be interruptive in class. So, and a lot of times, instead of labeling our children, and it's good that there are teachers that consider some of these behaviors to be, and they look a little bit further, it shows concern for the students. And so that, that we can ensure that they receive the assistance that they need, as opposed to saying, hey, send them to, juvenile detention, or send them to school in suspension. We need to delve deeper into some of the behaviors that we observe as, not necessarily just as teachers, the administration, and even parents. I'm sure it's a holistic approach with respect to parents, teachers, the administration, all working together so that these, students' needs are met. I think this is excellent, and you're providing a lot of information that we need today, and so much appreciate you for this.
Yeah, and the point to make about, students with behavior challenges, that's a part of doing the evaluation, is really seeing, well, even before then, doing observations and things, looking at doing observations during different times of day, in different settings, to kind of see, is it the morning that is most challenging, so those are some things that they really look at, but really trying to see if the behavior is impeding the learning, like if they're just failing, or if they're just failing certain subjects. It may not necessarily be paper. So it's just a lot of that get that hit and miss, really trying to find the best picture of that child based on everything. But behaviors do play a huge piece, because if they're not able to receive the content and information and instruction, they're going to get further and further behind. So it's just what
Absolutely.
so. But we need to know if we're going to be addressing overall behaviors, or we just really focus on academics. But those evaluations and all that information would help give us that picture, because it could be that we're just writing a behavior intervention plan and providing no supports and whatever other accommodations or something that are needed as a child goes throughout the school campus or school environment. So
Excellent, excellent. So I believe you touched on this earlier with respect to once a child has been identified, right, as needing these special services, right, or differentiated services. How is the teacher at the teacher level in the classroom? I know that they're not necessarily, it's not obvious that there's a child, or maybe it is, that have these special needs. How are the teachers? I mean, is there a bit of I would imagine there might be a bit of confidentiality there, so that kids are not picked on, called out, and that type of thing. How is an IEP plan implemented in the classroom?
Okay, so what I will say is that it's an IP team that is part of that process as far as when that goes into the evaluation, and even in the referral. There's most of the time it's that child's teacher, maybe if they have a regular ed teacher, and they're also a special education teacher that's involved as well. Through the evaluation, from the referral to the evaluation. So once those things are in place, the teacher is a part of the team. So they're working with with IEP team. They're the ones that's going to be, the special ed teacher is going to be the one to say, okay, once they determine eligibility. So the eligibility has to be determined, and then there's an IEP. So then that special ed teacher receives the student's folder or information. And they start working on, based on what the evaluation results are, they start working on figuring out what specially designed instruction is the child is going to need, the setting and different things like that. So they'll start doing that, and they work with the regular ed teachers. So yes, there are some levels of confidentiality, but the student, and most of the time it just depends. A lot of schools, a lot of districts have that flow of information set up. They have a structure for that. So typically they would work together and say, okay, this is what this child needs. This is a specially designed instruction that I can be working on, that I'll be working on maybe with the student based on my expertise as a special education teacher. And I'm working with a regular ed teacher to say, okay, these are the things that this student needs in your classroom, or when they're in your class, So it just depends. So that's how they're aware of the needs of the child. Now, and they work together. They work together with the special education teacher, and they're able to, understand, okay, well, I mean, I know it says that, they're going to need, modified assignments. I'm not really familiar with how to do that. That's where we would come in and we would say, okay, these are the things when we meet and try to plan together. I'll know, what's coming up. So we know the child struggles with reading. So maybe if I had, if we could work together, I can kind of help modify that content to where it still meets, and the student is still receiving the standards, the standard course of study based on what their grade level is. So it's just a team type effort. But that's how that is how they're supposed to be aware of the child's levels and needs, and they work as a team to understand the student and know how they need to.
Okay, that's great. I mean, obviously there's some major benefits. We kind of touched on these. I know that there's some major benefits to having an IEP, simply because, if a child has, once the teacher may even identify, say, oh, they're struggling. We kind of spoke to that. That may be one of the qualifiers in meeting, the eligibility requirements with respect to receiving these type of needs. So what would you say, in your experience, are the true benefits of having an IEP?
Well, I think that I would say, the process is what they study the child, they understand the child, and they know, what the child needs. The benefits of that is because they've done that extensive study on the student. They know what's needed. They know what to try to talk through and how to advocate for the student and what they need, parents as well. So it doesn't say that once a student gets an IEP, we don't always want them to stay, with a student with an IEP. We want them to progress and be able to, hopefully catch up
Right.
with their regular peers and things like that. So it does have certain safeguards based on the student and the needs of the student. Behaviorally, there's parameters there where there are some requirements that you have to go through to, if a child is getting suspended a lot, they have to do a
Yes.
manifestation determination. If they're over 10 days, they have to do that. They also have to make sure the child has a behavior intervention plan. They do. They have to address those things. So there's some certain benefits of that, especially when it comes to discipline, and then also just accessing the content, the grade level content.
Excellent, excellent. So are there any things that parents should be concerned about with an IEP? And the reason why I pose this question is because, as you just mentioned, I would imagine the school as well as parents want their child to progress. A lot of times, once you're identified, sometimes I've heard some instances where it's hard for a child or student to get out of, having to receive those special needs under the program. And say, for instance, the parents say, well, I don't think they need it anymore. However, they're challenged by the system and it kind of follows them. So it may be hard for them to get out of it. And so have you heard of any of these things? And what would you say that parents should, do in the event something like that happens?
Well, I think I will say that once a child is identified as a student with a disability under one of the categories, they have a 3-year reevaluation. Or if there's new information, maybe something that's happened to the student, you just call an IEP and they would reassess to see if there's some additional needs that need to be added. But if they have an IEP, they're reevaluated, or a reevaluation determination is made every 3 years, meaning the determination means, okay, how is the student doing now? Are they doing better? Are they progressing? Does it look as if they need to continue? So it depends on the reevaluation and those results. The data from that should drive that, should help drive that decision. Now, at any point, if a parent doesn't want, because even once the child is determined to have an eligibility under a category, the parent doesn't necessarily have to sign off to say
Agree and sign
that
off
they'll
on it.
give them to provide those services. So that's always the conversation. But typically, it happens. The parent, makes the school aware, and they would call an IEP team, and they would go through a reevaluation, probably determination too, at that time, even if it has been a 3-year mark or whatever at whatever time, to go through and say, this is what the child is doing. This is the services that the child is receiving. This is how this is how your child is doing. So then they'll talk through those to see, okay, weigh the pros and cons and say, okay, this is what they're receiving now. And they would talk about, how if the child would go back into no longer had an IEP, then we wouldn't necessarily have those safeguards. So they would talk through those things. So I wouldn't say that the school would challenge or whatever, but I do know that they would be having meetings, and they would really be asking to have some time to do some evaluation and assessing to just make a good, more informed decision. But at any time, a parent, they do have the right to go and request anything.
Okay. And that leads sort of into my next question in terms of the effectiveness and how long, which you spoke to it already. So it's there's a reevaluation. That plan is effective for basically a 3-year term, and they, obviously they've continued to pay attention to this plan and making sure that the teachers are, meeting the needs of, these children in the classroom, as well as you said, the whole entire team. But the one thing that, and I'll tell you, just in my law school experience, I was wondering with respect to at the collegiate level, is an IEP where a child has been identified from, even if it's kindergarten, elementary, middle school, high school, and then graduates, is that IEP, can it be used even at the collegiate level? And I asked this question simply because even in law school, there were students who received additional time on their examinations that we took. And sometimes I wonder, I say, well, goodness, I wish I got a little bit more time. But I'm wondering if, in fact, the IEP is effective at the collegiate level, or is that a different level of evaluation?
Okay, so let me put a pin in that. Let me go so we can come back to that.
Okay.
Let me go back to, I want to clarify the difference between what I said as far as the reevaluation to look at the
Yes.
student,
Yes.
but an IEP is good for a year. So it's the student receives an IEP before the next time, that same time next year, they are supposed to have another IEP. They're having an annual review. So they review the IEP every year. They
Okay.
review the IEP every year, but the reevaluation to kind of determine the continued need is every 3 years, or whenever someone needs to call a meeting that way. But they do address the IEP yearly.
Okay. Perfect.
Let me make sure I think that. Okay, so going back to
At the
at the
collegiate
college level, so I will say it depends on the college and the university.
Oh,
it
okay.
does depend on that, and I can say as far as at the high school when they're doing their SATs
Yes.
or ACTs, there's a certain process they have to go through to request those accommodations or modifications. So we would just all the school can do is just provide them with the information that tells the accommodations and the needs of the student. Now it depends on, it's out of the school's hands. The college board, whomever they're taking those evaluations through, they make those decisions.
Makes sense. Okay.
So if a child is going to college, like I said, it depends on the college. Most of the time, hopefully they make those, it would follow them, and it wouldn't necessarily be an IEP at that point. They would go ahead, and once a child graduates from high school, they would exit special education due to graduation.
Absolutely. Okay, got it. Thank you for that. I think that's a very clear distinction that you've made there, because actually when you go into college, they do assessments, and based on your skill set or strengths, they may even put you in remedial math and reading. Oh, very good, very good. Thanks for clarifying that. And that brought back, so I do recall that. And so they look at, each individual student that they have admitted to make sure that they're receiving certain, because even though you graduate high school, you still may find that there are some needs more assistance in math or reading, and they have remedial courses for that. Excellent.
And I would suggest parents and the students, because they can advocate by the time they're graduating, they would make sure that they have their copies of their IEP and any other information, that even if the college may not necessarily, it's not going to carry out the IEP, but at the same time, they have the information, they can advocate on that. So they can actually be able to have the conversations, and this is what, my child's needs are, or these are my needs. Well, it won't, because at that time, it won't be the parent making that.
Right.
So there's some self-advocacy and things like that are built in at the high school level. We tried to do that initially at elementary. We want you to know what, speak up for what your needs are. But at the time that the student is graduating, they can have the information and they can initiate those conversations. These are my needs. And hopefully they'll hear them and they'll go ahead and, provide those supports. Some schools, depending on a college or university, they focus on students with disabilities. They know, those things are already built in, and it just kind of, it works. And sometimes I'll say some students go to those programs initially right out of high school, and then they may transfer to another school for years. So, but it just depends. But fully carrying out an IEP does at the college level they wouldn't necessarily do that, but they would be able to receive and hopefully put some parameters and supports in place for the students.
Excellent differentiation. I think that's great, because I wanted to understand how long does that carry, but you're right. Once they graduate, then it picks back up at the collegiate level where they then assess. That's really good. I thank you for that, providing that clarity for me. Now,
and the only other thing, I'm sorry.
No, please.
Once because depending on their disability, and as they transition to to work or to school, there's the American Disabilities Act.
Yes.
Which is not necessarily IDEA or whatever, but it's the ADA. But that's where those other things can pick up to advocate. This is my child. This is, depending on what it is. So some of those, they may want to kind of look into that as well when they're going to college.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. One of the things, just because again, as an attorney and actually as a former juvenile court counselor, where I saw
Mhm,
all the kids in the county that committed undisciplined and delinquent acts,
mhm,
um,
mhm,
which essentially, as an adult, they would call them crimes. But
mhm,
with respect to that, I know that specifically, I wanted to understand, is there any consideration for IEPs at the court level? I know the law is the law. If a child breaks the law, if they, commit an undisciplined act, I wanted to understand in terms of sentencing, if you're aware of any differentiations, any considerations of IEPs, because I know, just coming from my experience as juvenile court counselor, we would, I would speak essentially sometime to teachers because,
mhm,
there may be school visit requirements.
mhm,
I would speak to the officers, as well as just the administration as a whole. But I can't say that I've had a child, either on the caseload or that I've met that
mhm,
had, or may, I don't even know how long it's been implemented, but to have an IEP plan that was considered, you know, at the court level. So I wanted
mhm.
to understand if, in fact, now granted, there were children who were identified as having or diagnosed with like ADHD, ADD, and, of course, there were community-based alternatives and resources that we would
Mhm.
use in that instance. So I kind of wanted to understand, with respect to IEPs, do you know if the court considers IEPs at sentencing or during sentencing?
So I would have to look at it talk about it from the different, like from the juvenile
Yes, yes.
through adult. Most of the time from the juvenile perspective, they have the juvenile counselors, and I think having a relationship, I think with the juvenile counselors and making sure that we're communicating with one another,
Yes,
that's huge. So
yes.
as far as when a child that's I think what is age now? As far as an
A
adult,
juvenile, 7 to 15.
as far as when they transition as an adult, what is that now? Where
Oh,
they
the
live
age
at
is 16. Yes.
16.
They
Okay.
age out of the Department of Juvenile Justice at
R-
15. Once they turn 16, they are considered an adult.
Right. Okay. Gotcha.
Hmm.
So most of the time when a child has been removed or for whatever reason for where there's a crime or whatever, and they go to detention centers,
Hmm.
they we we don't have a lot of interaction.
At that point.
Probably should have more, but the juvenile counselor is the one that can advocate and would be able to be the one to say, okay, this is a child's needs here. And we would hope that hopefully the school will work with the counselor, whomever it is at the center where the child is. So hopefully
That
they
would
would
be
be
ideal.
right.
Hmm.
So now, but those are things, and those are that's something to know because you would need to ask the school
Hmm.
or the district, how do they support the students if they transit? Because it depends on the district, but
Hmm.
they are required to have some form of education. Now, when they transition into the adult system, and I've done it. So what has happened is they're actually in jail.
Yes.
They're
Okay.
in jail. And when
Yes.
they transition to prison, that's something.
Hmm.
So what happens is we are still required to try to provide some kind of support. I used to do
Hmm.
it when I had students, and when I was
Hmm.
working at the district level, I would go and do it's called homebound. You have to have an IEP and put,
Yes.
the setting is
Yes.
on. So
Hmm.
I would go to the jail, and that's when you were talking earlier about at the beginning of our conversation around that,
Hmm.
building that relationship with the jail
Hmm.
is good because what happened is I was able to have, which unfortunately there's a lot more opportunities I had to do that than none. But
Hmm.
I would set up, would think and talk through what is the best time, and I would
Yes.
go to the jail and they would provide a place. So you would be able to make plans to receive the child back if the
Hmm.
child was going to, while they're waiting for court or whatever. If they were convicted and they went on to prison, we no longer, I'm talking about only services right now.
Right. Only
Services
services.
only.
Right.
But now
Hmm.
when you're talking about sentencing and looking at that,
Hmm.
they would most of the time, it may not be an IP that they would be asking for, but it will be that evaluation information, that reevaluation
Yes.
evaluation information
Yes.
where they're looking at the
Mm-hmm.
psychological, which
Mm-hmm.
gives their
Mm-hmm.
IQ and the different achievement
Mm-hmm.
level, whatever. So a lot of times, and as a special ed director, I would get requests from the courts or
Okay. Mm-hmm.
for based on their clients or whatever. So I would get them,
Excellent.
provide them with the evaluation. So they do tend to look at that. I don't know as a practice how how it works because I'm not on that side of the justice
Right.
side. Know how I
Right.
work with them, but
Right.
they have requested, attorneys have requested, and all that takes is that the person to, whether it's this adult child
Mm-hmm.
or whatever, to sign off on that to get that information, or for me to be able to, for the district to be able to send that information. Because a lot of times it could even been students that had IEPs years ago. They may have not even that, and when they finished high school, they may have not still had an IEP or whatever.
Mm,
So, and they're also, which those are other, talking about record retention and things like that. There are certain
right.
categories of disabilities where you have to maintain their records,
Mm-hmm.
but it just depends on their disability there, depending on how long they would be able to have those records. Now, there have
Excellent.
been times that based on if a district has retained the records properly or
Mm-hmm.
not retained them properly, there
Mm-hmm.
have been times sometimes where that district may warrant a psychologist could do a psychoeducational for them. But most of the time, but they have requested records based on
Okay.
that if they're going through a case or something. So
That's great because we want to make sure that sentencing is fair.
mhm,
We know sometimes there are disparities in
mhm,
sentencing,
mhm,
and the concern that I have is that if in fact there is a child who has been psychologically assessed, who are receiving services in school, but they're sent over to the Department of Juvenile Justice for being undisciplined. Honestly, I didn't feel like the child had a place really over there. The referral should have never been made,
mhm,
simply because if the school is the one that knows that the child has an IEP and they understand that they're servicing them in that way, then why are you sending a petition over for undisciplined behavior? There should be something in the school system that can facilitate, a child in a way that can help them improve upon that behavior as opposed to using the court system. And a lot of times I did see that, unfortunately. So, but thank you for that information.
mhm.
I'm so happy that you shared that. That is being considered, and you've served in the manner with respect to sharing records when
Mhm,
requested.
mhm,
One other thing you mentioned, and I want to highlight that, is the fact that I know that you're a strong advocate in the community, which is why I wanted to speak with you today. You have been a strong advocate in the community. I've actually contacted you um, in the past, and you provided such vital information in intricate details with respect to special education and IEP plans. And I tell you what, I appreciate you so much for the work that you do, simply because there are so many fine line nuances with respect to this work. And it takes a special person to be able to do what you do and advocate in the way that you have.
Thank you.
So really
Thank you.
just wanted to put a pin in that and highlight that,
Thank you.
to everyone, because you're phenomenal with the work that you do. And
Thank you.
just so honored that you're here today.
And Tay, I
Um,
do want to just say, and I think I
yes,
touched on it a little bit when you're
yes,
talking about with the juvenile, the students being sent over to the juvenile system or whatever.
yes,
I wanted to speak again to the behavior support,
yes.
because at that point, the child probably has been in trouble a lot at school.
Okay.
But what is supposed to be happening is they have a behavior intervention plan that should be being followed as part of the IEP.
Oh,
But
okay.
and also sometimes students' behaviors change, so they may have an IEP, but they may not have a behavior intervention plan. But if behaviors are showing that there's an issue with behaviors, that's where
Mm-hmm.
like I said, the reevaluation is normally 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's something that's changed with the student, meaning new behaviors, then they
Yes.
may do a reevaluation and evaluate the behaviors with different tools. Then from
Excellent.
that, they have to implement the behavior intervention plan and follow that and they have to meet a lot of times. Sometimes we put it up for like a 30-day review to review. I mean, looking at the dates, looking at the date and seeing how their behaviors are changing or whatever, and making adjustments on the plan. Once a child gets to the point, like I mentioned earlier, of if they've been suspended for 10 days or more, whatever, all those things should have been taking place. It shouldn't be like once that child commits whatever incident, they're
Right.
told. Now it does depend on and their school's code of conduct tells what those behaviors are, because there are certain behaviors that were childs that may be a danger to themselves or others.
Okay.
Sometimes like with weapons, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It does warrant maybe a removal, but even with that, there has to be a meeting. Then that's a manifestation determination.
First.
That has to be the meeting to say, how are you going to provide the services for this student, and what does it look like, because they're not in the school building. Because sometimes they do have to be removed from the building due to safety concerns. But it doesn't go away. It's the same thing. It's the same, process. Like I said, we would look at if a child if someone goes to jail or whatever. We're looking at those in that school environment, but they say have to provide those services. Now, what it looks like, the IEP team meets to determine what that is and how that looks. Because we've even provided homebound services at the police station. Even while they're, and that's where they come, even though they may not be in jail, but that may be because you have the teachers, their safety, and they're, where they want to feel like they're in a safe environment to provide those services.
Understood.
So the parent can bring the child to the police station. I used to do it at the library a lot. They just come and you set it up, but that has to be, you have to meet on that. So all those things should have been taking place. So, if they have been referred to juvenile court, hopefully their, parents have been able to say that they've been working with them on these things. But
and everything has been exhausted before you get to Department of Juvenile Justice and filing petitions with Department of Juvenile Justice. So what I hear you, if the plan has been worked, and ultimately there is a recommendation or a petition that's filed against the child, all of those other steps and the plan in every step should have been exhausted. And the remedy at that point may not be necessarily a viable one in the school. So then once it reached that, it's like the plan has been worked, nothing has worked at that point, and this is our last resource.
And then you still have the conversation about the how, because they still have to receive services. So
okay, great, goodness, that's good information. So tell me, what if, we talked about the fact that there may be a child who the parent is saying, okay, they no longer need these services. But what about a parent who says, my child's needs are not being met in the classroom? What is the first thing that parent should do? Should they contact the administration outright, or should they sit down with the teacher first, address these concerns? Because obviously this is a legally binding document, and it should be followed accordingly. So what would you recommend a parent to do if in fact they feel that their child's IEP plan is not being followed adequately and accurately?
Well, I would always recommend that they start with the child's teacher.
Okay.
I would always recommend that initially and have that conversation and see what they're having to say and seeing if they're putting any things in place for the child in the classroom. But if that, there's sometimes that may not be enough. And if that's the case, then I would say that they would need to talk with the school's principal or administrator, have that conversation and go through seeing how they're supporting and making adjustments. And then sometimes you have to go outside the school, and that next person out of the school, I would say their special education director for that district.
Excellent. Okay. And I know you've served at the district level. I mean, you started out, as you said, as we, shared early, a teacher's assistant, and you were, and that was what is really what I found to be fascinating. You started out as a teacher's assistant in special education, and then you rose to these levels to the extent that you represented the district, and then you went on to the state level. I mean, the passion and the commitment in this area, it is certainly impressive. And again, which is another reason why I wanted to talk to you, because I know that you're well versed in this, and you certainly provided a lot of information today. Can you share, is there any resources that are available to parents? I mean, is there any parent groups that, where parents can, seek support? Because this can be, a new thing. Some people, have concerns with their child being labeled or having an IEP plan. And, would you recommend, or is there any, parent support groups out there where a parent can reach out, to another parent or even an agency that can, help them through this process?
Most states have, and districts, they have parent centers
Okay.
where they can go and they can connect and find information. I will go back to your previous question as far as how to, what are the steps if you found out if your child's IEP is not being followed.
Yeah.
And,
Okay.
once again, if you've gone through the special education director, and then if it doesn't seem to be enough, there is this, every state has a complaint where you can provide a complaint or just an inquiry at the state level. So that would be something that, that may be the next step if they don't see they're getting any movement from the district. So they would connect with the state. I will say that to make sure that they've gone through that, going through the district options, because I can tell you, once it comes to the state, it's going to kind of prolong, the interaction, because they're going to go back to the district and try to figure out what's happening. So if you bypass some of those resources in the district, then you're going to be referred back there. So it's good to start. And it's still about the relationship as well,
Yes.
But I would say that you would need to try to exhaust all your resources at the district level before you go to the state level.
Okay. Okay. And we're coming almost near the end of our conversation, but I want to just in your personal experience with respect to being in special education, all of these years, in your opinion, what are some of the things, I'll say, that just key things that a parent should know, about IEP and the IEP process? Just high level, what are, in your opinion, in your experience, from your experience, what do you think that parents should know about the IEP process?
They should know the services in the IEP. They should know how. So when I go back to the question, what should a parent do when their child's IEP has not been implemented? They should understand what those supports are and what that specially designed instruction should look like. So they'll know, because sometimes, the IEP doesn't lay out exactly how the instruction is going to be delivered. It talks through the higher level. So when the teaching comes in, it's like, those are the things. Ask which service or what support are you providing based on IEP?
Okay.
Because it's not saying that they won't use, spectrum math. They may say they're not, but it could be some things that they may not, or they looking at their homework and what their homework looks like. If the child, they're saying they're modifying the student, your child's assignment, but does it seem like the child is overwhelmed with doing homework? Is the child not finishing classwork? Because that's something that, even just with that, if their assignments aren't being modified, that's an issue with the implementation of the IEP. So just being aware of what the services are that's put in the IEP, and then actually understanding how they're going to be delivered in the classroom. And following and talking to the teacher to make sure that they understand. And if you don't, because we use a lot of jargon. We got, like we say, IEP. We got a lot of jargon led, but to really make sure that they're versed in what their child is supposed to be receiving, and and finding out and asking questions. If they don't know, ask.
Okay. I think that's key information. And again, you've provided a lot of information for a lot of our listeners. Again, I felt that there was certainly a need to address this, simply just from my background and experience, as an attorney, have worked in the criminal justice system, have served as a juvenile court counselor for the Department of Juvenile Justice, and many years ago, but certainly understanding the laws with respect to, children and their rights and juveniles, et cetera. But a lot of times there's an underlying premise or a foundation that might be there that we haven't even considered. And that's why, and I have friends who have children who are on IEP plans, and they've come to me just because, obviously I am a lawyer and I can look at that law for them and kind of give them basic information, but essentially that's not my area of expertise. I'm a corporate lawyer, but I thought it was critical to have this conversation with you today, simply because you're well versed in it, skilled, educated, and have a number of years experience, and you worked at the school level, again, starting as a teacher assistant, then working on the state level, and then now your work, doing policy and et cetera, and looking at those things. I think it's critical to have this information and have you sit with us today, because again, a lot of our parents have a lot of these questions that just are not, um, they have questions that aren't being addressed properly. And so I felt like it was critical for us to have this here in this conversation with you today. And I thank you for all the information again and the advocacy that you have essentially brought to our local community, our hometown of Hickory, North Carolina, but even beyond that. So thank you so much for your work. We certainly couldn't do it without you.
Thank you, Tay. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And to the listeners, thank you guys for just sitting with us today. Hopefully received a lot of information today. Hopefully you were able to, and in the future, use it, so that when you go into your school systems, when you go in and sit down with your teachers, that you have the knowledge that you need. Miss Witherspoon has provided some, vital information here and some resources that are available to you. I charge you to look through your plan, understand it, and if you have questions, meet with the team that is supposed to implement that plan. So remember, I'm not telling you what to think. I'm only asking you to think. So until next time, goodbye.
Bye-bye.